Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining, and most importantly, thanks for bringing the topic to the table. Right, I think updates for ISO 27001 were published last year, and I think it's great to see that people are open to understanding more and understanding what people have done since the updates came out. So for those who are not part of the South Africa Community Forum, the WhatsApp group, we had a bit of a conflab and a back and forth to it, and fortunately we have Bevan Lane, who's part of the group, who's working on ISO since before. Yeah, so Bevan, over to you, sir. Enjoy the dance floor.
All
Learn
right.
us.
Okay, guys. I will do a quick introduction of myself. I'm sure not everybody knows me. I'm not that famous, so not as like Michael J. Fox, I suppose. Yeah, I've been doing ISO certifications and advisory and audit work since probably about 2003. So it is about 20 years. And I wasn't here at the beginning of ISO. That's partially why I'm going to tell you about the history. The beginning of ISO is very much a British led expert. That's why I've also done some stuff here to a lot of allude back to the origins of where it comes from. So it started off in Great Britain and became an international standard over time. And I've been auditing it since, like I said, about 2003. The experience and the implementation, the audits I've done on it, started off working for Shell, and we then started doing all their work as they were implementing across all their countries in Africa and in Western Europe. So I've done a lot of work learning how the standard needs to be done and learning how the standard can be done wrong, learning how many mistakes I've made personally, and had quite a lot of fun. Even though, and that's why I've tried to make this presentation, as you can see from the first slide, it's not going to be a serious presentation. It's going to be serious when it needs to be, but it's also going to take the P a little bit because of the fact that people think this is an incredibly boring topic. And I actually don't find it an incredibly boring product because I deal with such interesting people and such interesting companies doing this standard that make it an interesting interesting topic. And I do know a lot of you that have done my training know that that's the way we do it. We make it interesting, we make it fun, because actually it can be rather like that. And I'm going to set that tone. One of the people in the Alliance has said something along the line of, this is the most boring topic ever. And I do think a lot of people do approach it wrong, and that's why we can set that tone to start it like that, hopefully. So that's, let's get stuck into it. The sort of thing, I looked at that picture and also thought, there's a lot of people, why did I put that picture in? Because there's almost like, it's pointless. And I think a lot of people almost look at ISO and go, why? Why do we need this? And a lot of people also look at ISO and implement it without really getting the benefit out of it. They're almost like doing it too much as a tick box. We had a company who literally had to be certified. They phoned us. They said, we're coming, we need you for certification. But they wanted the smallest budget. They hardly had any money. We just had a few boxes and do an audit. And when we did the audit, we found that they had bought a product to help them, and they were going through an entire process. But what happened after that is the minute they were certified, they canceled their subscription to the product, they canceled our thing, and they literally just went into complete, okay, we've done it now, we tick the box. And it was a perfect example of a company with 3 or 4 people who were like, we need to get certified to please some people, but we're going to do the bare minimum. They literally canceled their subscription, canceled our contract, and I don't know if they know that this thing doesn't go away. It's continuous, it's constant. And I found that as one of the worst, and this was 3-4 months ago. This is very recent, which is why I found, wow. So you can be certified, you can do this on the bare minimum. The guy running it is a marketing guy. He wants to do everything with the lowest level of investment, everything with the lowest level of, he doesn't really buy into it. And there still are a lot of people that do that, I'm sure, based on that experience. Most of our clients have realized that this is a journey, it's a long-term thing. Most people I deal with in the industry know this is a journey and a long-term thing. But yeah, it can be interesting. You can see just how from one extreme to the other, literally cancel everything and then hope that next year when they need to do an audit, or maybe they're not going to do an audit, they've now shown that they're certified and they're just going to go under the radar. So there are a lot of ways of doing this, and that way leads to almost no benefit for anybody. It's just a tick box that you've shown your clients, which I found very, very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit let's do the summary of what it is and the history lesson. The first thing to know really is this thing's been around for a long time. Well, ish thing, but it can also be a very complex thing. And I have seen people phone us up completely in a shock. They don't understand this thing. They don't understand any of the terms. When you're dealing with a company with 5 people and they've been thrown in the deep end because they need to ISO 27001, they barely understand what IT is. It can be really, really complex. And then for a lot of other people, do a lot of stuff. They're very, very experienced in this. They understand it. We've dealt with clients who've actually been involved in 5 different companies getting certified, and they've done this over 20 years. And you can imagine learning from people like that, which has really been interesting as well. So it can be from beginning to complex or very, very simple. Okay, so the definition. That's the stuff you can go and Google. You can see it. But the one thing I want to say about this is people often get this wrong. They think that ISO is actually 27002, where all the controls are. And a lot of people we deal with don't understand that this is actually a management system. They just think it's a list of controls. And they go to Annex A and they go, there's a control there about physical security, about HR, about antivirus, or about access control. And they implement those controls. The first thing that any of you that have not done this yet need to understand is that 27001 is ISMS, an information security management system. And the words there tell you what you need to know. Now, we're going to tell you about how the name has changed a bit later for the new version, and it covers a bit more than just maybe information security. But it's always been that word, ISMS, an information security management system. And that means that this thing is a system, it's ongoing, it's continuously maintained, it's continuously audited, it's continuously looked at, and it's something that should stay with you forever as part of a system. The one thing we're finding very interesting is a move to an integrated management system, and that's a completely separate topic. But understand now people are bringing quality and business continuity and maybe ITIL. Maybe they're bringing other topics that are not even similar to security or privacy into one system to try and make this as easy as possible. And that for me is incredibly logical. All systems are based on very, very logical to actually have one system instead of putting security by itself. Quality. And people can rebut me and tell me there are some systems that are not based on quality, but almost all systems, I'll say it that way just to cover myself, are actually quality. 9001 is the mother of all of these integrated systems. And I do find it quite funny sometimes when people go, well, we don't need quality. It's not really that important. Quality is the basis for everything. So if you actually are clever on how you do an integrated management system, you'll start with quality and you'll bring all these aspects into it, including security. Security, unfortunately, has done something which has made it different to everybody else, and that is Annex A. Annex A is a list of security controls that was, when I show you the history, the start of this whole thing. And then it only became a management system later, which is why ISO 27001 is quite different to all the other standards. However, it shouldn't be. It should be the same. It should use quality. Okay, that is very interesting if you start to unpack that in what you're doing in a company. how do I do this? And when you're looking at a lot of companies have always been 9001 certified, and they then go on a whole new project to do 27001 and don't realize that there's this very strong link, or they do realize a strong link, but because the security guys want to do it their own way, they don't necessarily align it to that. Okay, so there's some very interesting things that when you've experienced it, that you do see in ways that you can make this a lot better. The one thing that I do think that you do need to realize is that this is the biggest standard in the world. You can go into NIST and you can say NIST is competitive. You can look at things like COBIT. You can look at other control mechanisms. There's lots. Every country, Australia or UK, has its own little funny ones. But 27001 is the mother. It is the one used the most. The Americans are obsessed with NIST and they still use it a lot. But you'll see with the new standard, it's now trying to actually bring the two together a lot more. And I think even NIST has realized that there's a way of bringing the two together. Okay, that's why the worldwideness, the international exposure of this is what makes it valuable. And I do like the concept of something called a shared myth, where there's a book by Noah Harari where he talks about shared myths. And this is that. It's a shared myth. It was invented in the 90s, but it's a very well accepted shared myth. And if you look at it for that value, you can get a lot of value out of it. Okay, so remember the other word there, framework. And when we are implementing an ISMS, we are doing it to establish, implement, operate, monitor, review, maintain, and continually improve what you're doing. That's another message that, based on that case study I told you about, that guy who implemented and then just cancelled everything the next day. You cannot do that. It has to be a framework. It has to be over a life cycle. So we're talking about establishment, implementation, operate, monitor, review, maintain, and continue to improve. So when you are implementing this, you are looking across all those stages, and if you look, there's a couple other pictures of it where it shows you that it's a life cycle, that it goes around and around forever. Okay, so that's really explains an ISMS really, really well, I think. That picture of the Atacama Desert is amazing. I thought I'd try and find the driest thing in the world, and theoretically the Atacama Desert is the driest thing in the world. And a couple of years ago, it had such a massive storm that pink flowers came out of nowhere to actually make it less dry for a couple of days. And I love that picture because it explains even the driest things can actually turn into something glorious and pink. And maybe that's what a lot of people need to do is think about how security and ISO can become that when you're doing it in your company. And I think a lot of what we're seeing over the last couple of years is where people are doing that. They're trying to make security more into the mainstream. They're trying to bring more diverse topics and people and things into it, which and I think ISO can very much become that. Okay, yeah. So the topic, when I look at other people's presentations, I couldn't find anything interesting to find from other people's presentations. I'm sure there have been other ones where people have tried to have a bit of fun about the topic. There are lots of 27,000 standards. I'm going to show you on the next slide how many 27,000 standards there currently are. And yeah, there probably aren't 10 things actually. So let's pop on to how many standards there are. And 46 is the current number, according to Google, in the family of 27,000. Now, only a few of them you can actually be certified against. Most of them are reference standards. And I think that's good to understand. When someone says to you that they are certified in 27,005 as a company, or that they're certified in anything else, cloud, the ones they're certified in the standard against metrics, for example, or against risk management. It's not necessarily true, because you can only be certified against a very few. And 27,001, a lot of people tell you they're certified as a company in 27,002. You can't be. The ISMS is the key one. Then you've got 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are things which help you. They are reference standard which help you to get certified against 27,001. So 27002 is where Annex A has more details and tells you about the controls. But you implement it based on 27001 and the annex in 27001. You then can go read a very interesting one, which is 27003, which helps you with how to implement. It gives you sort of a project management approach and tells you much more detail on actually how to implement the standards, and actually gives you more detail on 2 and 1. So these three, if you do want to go through a project to implement an ISMS, are your key ones to look at. 4 and 5 are very important because they show you how to actually measure, and they show you how to apply an information based risk approach. And that's also another completely separate topic, is that we use an information asset based risk assessment approach to do this. But you can do other approaches. You don't have to use an information asset one, but we do recommend it, and it is a very nice way of doing this. Okay, so look at the metrics one and the risk management one. I would advise all of you in security who want to know more about anything about how to measure things and how to do risk assessment to look at those two. And I would look at, and obviously all of us, many of us have looked at 27002 and implemented or looked at and understood detail on the control. So that tells you what your password control should be. That tells you how to implement antivirus. That tells you how you can look at a IPS, IDS, network security type control. So there's quite a lot in there. There are other standards within standards also for industries, which a lot of people don't know about. These 46 standards, there's one standard for how to implement ISO for a telecom. There'll be one about how to do it for a financial services company. So those are very interesting to look at if you do want to look at it specifically for your industry. And it doesn't have every industry in there, but it has a lot that can be applied. So I would highly recommend that you look at those as well. The other three there that I've added in, 27,032 is the cybersecurity standard. And now that's very interesting because what it is, it's taken the NIST standard and created an ISO standard for the NIST standard. And it's giving you an overall approach for cybersecurity specifically. So you can get certified against it, sort of, by using it, but you generally add these three on, or you add the privacy one, which is 27701, and cybersecurity on as an addendum to ISMS in most cases. And incident management is one that you use as part of improving your incident management. Incident management is quite interesting because it's broken up into lots of different standards. And it's 3, 4, or 5 right now, because it does change. There'll be a part 1, part 2, part 3, and each one of those has different areas on how you do incident management. And I've seen a lot of the auditing companies actually come in and look at you against that. But you don't directly get certified against it. You always focus your direct certification on 27001. So
Cool.
27701 is the last one, which I haven't touched on enough. This is one that with the new evolution of the standard, where I'll show you the naming of the new standard now, where it's bringing in privacy and cybersecurity. So I do think there's a very close link now, that much closer than what it has been in the past. But there's a separate standard called 27701 that I suggest that all of you look at as well, because it's privacy information management system. So if you want to show that you are POPI, GDPR, Australian privacy, any other privacy law, there's an integrated privacy management system that you can look at. And the way it works now, which is really interesting, is that it's not a separate one. You add it on as an addendum to 27001. And we've had a lot of people think about it. There's a new version of it coming out quite soon, I hear, where they're going to try and bring in, try and align it to the latest version of GDPR, and look at to see how they look across the world to make it sure that it actually is a proper integrated management system on privacy. So it's got privacy by design, privacy by default. It's got things about how to code, how to deal with third parties. So this is a very interesting standard because, it's quite difficult to say that you are GDPR compliant or POPI compliant, to have a stamp to say I'm POPI compliant or GDPR compliant. There isn't really a mechanism. There's a lot of companies that do things on it, but you, with the PIMS, you can then take all questions, the same as you do for 27001 for security, and say, well, we are GDPR compliant, we are POPI, we are all these other ones because we have a PIMS, and we've added on to ISMS. So something to think about. And I think that's a separate topic we can do in 6 months or something if you are interested to talk about how privacy and information systems work. Okay, so let's quickly look at the history. So you can see I put some cool pics of relevant things. The fun I found quite interesting was that it came out in 1990 and Maradona played in the World Cup final in 1990, and the latest version came out in 2022 where Messi played in the World Cup final for Argentina. So there was like a nice way to bring the two together at the end. I was going to try and find some Welsh pictures, but there's no great Welsh history here that I could find. I'm jokingly. I'm sure I could have found a lot of good ones. 95 was the first time that it became a code of practice. So, here in 1990, it was developed into BS77, and then it became 77991. So, got to put a picture of 95 in there at all times. Then 98. But what is interesting is that these two code of practices were what we know as Annex A. So all the controls, we used to look at them here in 95 and look at the controls in Annex A and go, there's password length. There's a control here about how we can't log in after office hours. There's a control about physical security. All the controls were done first. And only in 98 was an ISMS type thing brought in for the first time. And that was the first time. So for 8 years, there were only controls for security, and then it became an integrated management system. Then in 2000, then ISO got hold of it for the first time and created an ISO standard. That ISO standard was actually only the controls, though, again, only the controls, and it was revised in 2005 together with, for the first time, to become an ISMS, where it became a management system. So a management system for the first time came in 2005, and I got a Hurricane Katrina picture. It's one of the biggest things that happened in 2005. And obviously, you could compare the size of the impact, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other things connected to that. So 2000, all the way from 2005 to 2013, the controls went through, they brought all the controls together. So they brought a whole lot of security controls that were named something else and created a whole family of controls for 27,000. So between the 2005 and 2013 is where we created the modern 27,000 family. There were controls everywhere. There were encryption controls and access controls and network security and a whole lot of other areas. And that's why they brought them together over that time. And then in 2013, where Chelsea Manning was sentenced, they created a new version of it. And that 2013 version is the one we've been using for the last, obviously, since 2013. And most of the companies that you know today are certified on 20 now. 13 or are moving to the later version, right? So the 2013 version and 2022 version is not as different as what people say the difference between 2005 and 2013 was. And a lot of people have said to me, it's a huge change. And the change is actually only massive because of the look rather than actually the content. And that's what I'm going to take you through now. So when consultants are trying to sell this to you, they say, oh, it's a massive change. You need a big project to do this. Most people realize it isn't a big project. It isn't actually such a massive change. It's more about the look and feel. Yes, there is a change management communication angle here that you probably should be aware of in terms of the change, but the change isn't really that big. But because of the look and feel change differences, which I'll show you just now, maybe it is a bit bigger than what it would have been if it hadn't changed the look and feel. Okay, and I think that's one we'll talk about now. So it's been around since a year now, almost, or more than a year as a draft, But in the last year, we see companies are moving from 2013 to 2022. I think the biggest change will be next year. I think next year, then the majority of people will be moving across. This year, there's been a lot of companies who are toying with it, half moving, starting their projects, and then others that have jumped in. What I found very interesting, there was a cybersecurity company in Joburg who got certified on the 2022 version last year already. And every auditor that we spoke to said to me, no, we're not ready yet. You can only do it next year. Only do it next year. And I think they forced an auditor. They went to the audit companies and said, no, we want to be the first one. And they got certified like November 2022 already on it, which was incredible, actually. And a lot of companies then started in the January, February as quickly as possible to get certified against it. But most people, like most of us, are a little bit more careful and are moving across now or going to it in the next year, I think. Okay, which there's a picture showing you that just now. Okay, so overview. What are the major differences in terms of the change? And the title. I'm going to talk about the title, and we've already jumped into that a little bit. But now they've brought together some concepts. They've brought together security, cybersecurity, and privacy into one title. I'm not sure that I think it's such a wonderful idea. Does it really make such a difference to do that? But I do know a lot of companies have been changing their name from info to cybersecurity. They've changed the entire function from information security to cybersecurity. Is actually that and what they're trying to say here, they're separate, they're different, that you still need to keep security, but you need to look at cybersecurity, but you also need to bring privacy into what you're doing here. And I'll come back to that topic just now. The controls have decreased. Okay, so there used to be 114 controls, but now there's 93 controls. And as I might have hinted at earlier, people celebrate. They go, oh, brilliant. We've got less controls to do. This will be quicker. It'll be easier. It'll simplify things. It actually hasn't. And I think that number decrease, I'm not sure that I agree that it's made life simpler. I think it's actually made life more complex. And I'll show you just now why I think it's made life more complex. So yes, you can say when I'm doing an ISO project that it's going to be a quicker project now because I've only got 93 controls instead of 114 controls, but actually not, because of the way they've done it. And I'll talk to you about that just now. They have done something interesting. They've restructured it to 4 sections. So the previous version of ISO had it started at A5 and it went through to A18. So it had 19, I think if I do my maths right, 18 or 19 sections, 18 sections. Now it's only got 4 sections. Again, there's a good and a bad to that, because now it's simplification into 4 different areas, but you're not necessarily bringing topics together. And when we are implementing and auditing it, we have to sort of take a double take and go, well, how do we explain this to a client that you need to do a whole section on supply management? There's a whole area on development. And if you're only looking at 4 sections, you might not understand that the controls need to be brought together still in some way. Okay, and that's interesting. I do like the 4 sections for simplicity. And they are logical in the way they've done them, but you still need to understand that the controls have different areas that you need to look at. Okay, so when you look at those 2, then the third thing says 11 controls have been added. So that's where it gets confusing. So we've gone from 114 to 93, but we've added 11. How's that possible? And we'll talk about that just now. Okay, and I think that's part of what I'm saying is I'm not sure the work is less. I'm not sure the effort is less, because you've added 11 new ones. And we'll talk about the 11 new ones just now, or probably next session. But the 11 new ones are interesting because they include technology-specific ones. And while we're finding that the controls have become more general, so that's partial what's happened here. This decrease from 114 to 93 is I've made my controls more general and less specific. And I mentioned a control the other day. There was a control about logging in after office hours in the 2005 standard. Um, they took that control away and they made it into more of one about looking at managing your access control and how looking at people's roles and understanding when and how they need to, and looking at trends. They made it more general instead of a specific one about logging in after office hours, which I always find it was relevant in the 2000s, but now isn't so relevant. Now they've brought in some specific ones. And a good example is web filtering. So web filtering is, for me, I mean, why bring it in now in 2022 for the first time? People have been doing web filtering forever. Why is it so important to have it as a separate control in 2022? But they have, and we'll talk about the implications of that. Then the last change here, which is about the clauses, and I want you to understand that clauses are critical. Clauses are where you pass or fail. The controls, you can choose any controls according to ISO 27001. So I can choose the controls from NIST. I can choose the controls from COBIT. I can choose the controls from a standard that the Australians have set up. I don't have to use Annex A. However, almost everybody does. So I'm not telling you, but what the new standard is also trying to do is give you an opportunity to bring other standards in. So it's very focused more on that. You'll see when I'm talking about the clause changes, where it mentions that it's not specific for risk assessment that you have to match it only to Annex A. You can do it from anywhere else. So there's a big move now to actually have controls from anywhere. And I think it's quite a clever move, because some people felt that these Annex A controls don't necessarily give them the full exposure, don't give them enough in terms of what they need to do, and they were quite wanting to bring more in. And now we're stressing that you can. So you don't have to use Annex A. You can bring controls in from anywhere. However, I would recommend that you look very strongly at Annex A, because they are very good controls. Okay, so we'll talk about the clauses 4 to 10 minor updates.
Bevan, we do have a question. And it's something that I've thought actually in the past. I think there's some confusion with this because of CPs and CPDs and things like that. Is this certification towards or aimed towards organizations or to people within the organization?
So the certification for 27001 is for companies. One of the things about ISO 27001, which is interesting, is you actually can't put it on a product. So you can't make a golf ball or a Coke can ISO 27001 certified. It's very focused on companies. And that's a good question, because it ties into what the slide is talking about, is that the ISO International Standard Organization is actually a completely democratic organization across the world. So, for example, the Seychelles has the same vote as the US. And it also is only used for business reasons. ISO standards are not drawn up for a better purpose to improve the world necessarily. They are there for business reasons, but that business reason can be done to obviously improve the world. Okay, does that answer that question? A little bit of a long-winded way, but I think it does. It's for companies to be certified. You can, however, certify individuals through affiliate courses like the ISO 27001 lead implementer and lead auditor. So people can be certified, but the certification for an ISMS is for companies or public sectors, anything which is a body.
That's right. So for the certification of lead implementation and lead auditor for the PECB, originally mentioned that there was no cost for the AMFs, but they've recently introduced it. If you don't pay, if you don't pay it, you still seem to be certified. But can you lose the certification if you don't pay the AMF? So is that a question for PECB possibly, if you're not sure?
It probably is a question we'll validate with the PCB,
Hmm.
but you do get your certification for a 3-year period, just like you do for a company when you get certified. So that 3-year period, you will be covered. You will get, even if you don't pay your AMF in year 2 and 3, because you've got your certification for 3 years. After the 3 years, if you don't pay, then you won't be. So you will lose it if you don't pay on a yearly basis. They may get stricter and stricter on this thing, and then in year 2 say to you, if you don't pay, we're going to take it away. But they do give you a 3-year certification. Some of the reason behind it is because some of us leave cybersecurity, we go into other roles, um, and you need to show your CPEs that you actually are still involved. But obviously, it is a money making thing at the end of the day. So they do want you to pay. They actually, yeah.
Yeah,
It did, but I know that's where that question came
fair.
from. Yeah,
Which do you know which standard business continuity falls
I
under?
do. I could probably Google it to check the exact number, but business continuity. It's a very interesting thing because business continuity, when I talk about how the standard has evolved, sort of goes in and out of an ISMS, and it's still there. Um, is it 27,000? It's 20,000. Is it not? No, it's not 20,000. Google it.
30.
Yeah,
So someone's just posted in the group
20,000.
ISO 27001.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, no, to remember the
Yeah,
numbers sometimes, guys, gets a bit difficult.
there we go.
It is 22,000, that's correct. And it is often seen as separate to ISO 27,000, but some people do it together. They do it as a integrated thing as well. So, yeah, 22,000 is the correct one.
I think I want to thank you, Bevan, for consolidating and giving a history and creating that baseline of understanding around ISO. I think it's really beneficial for the next session, right? So, for those listening live and for those listening afterwards, as we release parts of this into our alliances communities, please utilize the form, utilize your regional director to pose any questions that you want and give us enough time to shape that next session to align it to yourselves. There's an option for more sessions on this, but obviously time sensitive and availability as well, right, of Bevan and his resource and his team's resource. So